There was a time that people could at least for moments move beyond partisan separatism and think about what was best for the promotion of the general welfare and the establishment of justice. So when we have a group of politicians that are constantly engaging in taking and taking and taking, they have a hard time even calling themselves Republicans. This is Tea Party extremism. Our former executive director for 15 years, Benjamin Hooks of the NAACP, was a Republican. Colin Powell, a Republican, came here and challenged the way this particular legislature and government is undermining voting rights. Bush and Kemp, Republicans, called trickle-down economics voodoo economics. Ronald Reagan embraced earned income tax credit. So anytime you have a group of politicians that can make Ronald Reagan look like a liberal, we need to have a real conversation. We need to have a real conversation. Don't just follow the cliff notes. It's time for something deeper. Governor Holzhauer, a Republican, invested heavily in rural economic development. Governor Martin, a Republican, embraced education. So what we are seeing now does not match the high standards of our Constitution. It does not match the high standards of our deepest moral values according to our faith. It doesn't even match the high standards of moderate republicanism. And it does not match the high standard of the history of progressivism in North Carolina. So the Moral Monday Forward Together movement is not what they try to say, a bunch of leftists or socialists, as though there's something wrong with that, first of all, but that's not who we are. And we will not answer to that name. We are black, we are white, we are Native American, we are Latino, we are Republicans, we are Democrats, we are independents, we are labor, we are businessmen who went to jail beside unemployed workers. We are doctors who went to jail beside uninsured workers. We are wealthy, uninsured people who went to jail because of the people who don't have insurance. We're from the West. We're from the East. We're from the South. We're from the North. We're from all over North Carolina, and we are coming together to mobilize like never before because we believe we can rise up from the lowlands of Tea Party extremism to the higher ground of what our Constitution and our deepest moral values call.
2 million of us are classified by the federal government as hungry. 622,000 of North Carolina children. We have the second highest child food insecurity rate in the country, just behind Louisiana. Greensboro is the second hungriest city in America. Winston-Salem is the hungriest city for kids under 5. Can you imagine being governor of the state with the most hungry babies and never mentioning it? I love puppies, but I'm old school, and I love babies even more.
And in North Carolina, what we have is a court system and a legislature that declares that it is illegal for people to stand up in their house and sing and pray and chant because their voices are too loud. And the loud voices disturb members of the General Assembly, and therefore they should be convicted of criminal offenses here in this state. Now, we talk about very simply this notion of going forward. And we're talking against this notion of going back. And if you continue to move this practice as we see it by these legislators, we are moving us back past where the Constitution, the North Carolina Constitution, was supposed to start us from. And that is why we can't go back. Not one step.
And yet, you have $10 million of taxpayer money to send public school children to private schools that, one, have no accountability.
That's right.
Two, they're not even required to have teachers who are certified. Another thing that they don't mention in those glossy pamphlets that have been going out is that there's no requirement not to discriminate against people with disabilities. Those glossy pamphlets don't tell you that they have the right to discriminate against people on the basis of their race, their gender, their sexual orientation. These private schools using public taxpayer dollars are not accountable to the very taxpayers funding them.
Expansion of Medicaid to the 500,000 people would have brought 25,000 new jobs by 2016. To help pay for this program nationally, and in anticipation of Medicaid expansion, the federal government is planning to decrease the disproportionate share hospital fund. Now, this is a technical thing. North Carolina each year gets $314 million from the federal government to pay for indigent care for hospitals like Duke and UNC and Carolinas Medical Center and Wake, etc. That money disappears over the next 10 years because they assume that all the states would have rationally expanded Medicare. Not so in North Carolina. The North Carolina legislature said they could not even afford the 10% cost 4 years from now, but neglect to point out that these patients will still become sick. They still need care, and they still will be admitted to their hospitals. So this is an unseen cost. It's not that there's no cost versus 10% for the state. We're still paying for it as taxpayers and people with insurance. Our insurance bill, my Blue Shield insurance bill, will go up 2% per year because we didn't expand Medicaid.
We know that the elimination of the Earned Income Tax Credit contributes to the tax increase on working families in North Carolina. As was mentioned, 900,000 working North Carolinians who are earning income, earning low wages, will see their taxes go up as a result of the elimination of this tax credit. On average, this means that the bottom 80% of taxpayers who have incomes of less than $84,000 will see their taxes go up. And again, this is while the top wealthiest taxpayers and profitable corporations in our state are receiving a massive tax cut. But that's not the only piece of the puzzle. When we offer tax cuts to the wealthy and profitable corporations, and we fail to balance our budget, we don't have the dollars to make investments in things like public education. In the years moving forward, we anticipate that this tax plan will reduce available dollars for investment by upwards of $650 million, almost $1 billion a year potentially. That means fewer dollars for educating our children, fewer dollars for maintaining our infrastructure, fewer dollars for making sure our access to justice and our courts are running efficiently, fewer dollars to protect the public health and environment in our state. I want to emphasize one other aspect of this decision, the decisions that were made. We have focused for a long time in North Carolina on how to address persistent poverty, concentrations of poverty. And one of the tools that we felt was very effective was targeting our economic development dollars to communities where there was high need. In this past budget, funding for 10 major initiatives that target dollars to both communities of color and rural communities were outright eliminated. That means that there are fewer dollars for communities that are struggling with high levels of poverty, high levels of unemployment. This is not the way to generate economic activity. It's not the way forward to address poverty in our state. And what it does is provide a tremendous benefit to only a very few North Carolinians. The economic losses from our state policymakers' decisions will no doubt be significant now and moving forward.
Under the age of 25. The government ID, 34% of those who don't have an ID are people of color. 64% are women. They are going after the segments of the population that they distrust. Young people, again, out of precinct voting. African Americans use that disproportionately than whites. Pre-registration of teenagers. They're getting rid of that even though Latinos, again, a rising youth Latinos and African Americans are a disproportionate part of the teenage population. They don't want young people coming into the population. The statistics show that actually white voters in North Carolina, there are fewer white registered voters today than there were in 2008. They're barely keeping up with the white registered voters as they die, as they move out. They're being replaced by people of color. That terrifies folks, some folks. But a fusion, if we have a fusion government, we have a fusion mentality, we have nothing to fear. This is what our brotherhood and sisterhood should be about.
I own a business, but that means I have insurance. It means I don't need unemployment. But it doesn't mean that my heart doesn't hurt for those who have lost those things. My heart hurts for the hungry children. I volunteer in a program at home called Food for Thought, where we feed hungry children on the weekends during the school year. 600 people in a small community is a lot. We have 1,300 people that are losing their Medicaid benefits in my community, and those people have names to me. They're my neighbors, my friends, my co-workers, they're people I love. How could you not? To those which much is given, much is expected, and much has been given to me and to a lot of other people who also need to stand up and come to Raleigh and speak to the power that is, I want to state that values children, that values education, that values clean water.
In Matthew chapter 25, we have that wonderful passage where Jesus talks about the final judgment of humanity, the separation of the sheep and the goats, and the determination for what goes on with people there. At the end of this, he says, "Truly I tell you, just as you have done it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me." We have a state right now that will take unemployed people, 170,000 of them, who are now without unemployment benefits and who will be hungry. We have a state now that is proposing fracking that's going to infringe upon clean water, the access to have something to drink. We have a state right now that is not welcoming aliens regardless of their immigration status. We have a state right now where vulnerable people, those who are called naked, those who are at risk in the larger system that we have, are going to have their voting rights infringed upon. We have a system where 500,000 potentially poor people will not gain access to health care through Medicaid expansion. Of those 500,000, the estimates are that 2,800 each year will die. And we have a system where people who are in prison are denied the simple help that they could get from the Racial Justice Act. So what I want to say today is that as we're hurting the poor, as we're hurting the marginalized, as we're hurting our elderly, as we're hurting our children, we are hurting God.
I don't know what you call this. Mistaken doesn't seem enough. Immoral doesn't seem enough. Knowingly brutal doesn't do it. We need new words. They have inflicted great, surpassing tragedy and betrayed the meaning and humanity of North Carolina. It is unworthy of the offices they occupy, the powers they wield. It is a sin against our hopes and aspirations and the most profound American value that we are all in this together. My father was a tough man, unschooled, plain spoken. When I would act out a little bit when I was a teenager, he would take me aside and he would say, "Boy, there are some things we don't tolerate in this house." That's exactly what the Moral Monday movement is. It is a declaration that there are some things we will not tolerate in North Carolina.